By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated, along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. How old were you when you were an adult? How old were you when you were grown up? I'm not asking how old you are right now, but how old were you when you felt like an adult? When you felt like you had made it? Was it when you turned 16 and got your driver's license? Is that when you felt like an adult? Did you feel like an adult when you borrowed your mom's car and then you didn't have enough money to pay for gas, so then you went to a payphone with a quarter and you called her? Is that when you felt like an adult? Did you feel like an adult when you turned 21? You bought a whole pack of cigarettes and you smoked them all and felt sick and threw up? Is that when you felt like an adult? Did you feel like an adult when you were 25? When you were able to rent a car and it was a little bit cheaper? Is that when you felt like an adult? Maybe you still don't feel like an adult. You probably should. I don't know. It's a question that people have difficulty answering. When did you feel like an adult? Because there's all these different stages. There's moving out, there's doing things on your own, there's making your own food, there's calling the doctor to have an appointment, there's getting your oil changed, whether you do it yourself or you pay somebody else to do it. There's a lot that goes into growing up as a person. But the good thing about doing it now is there are all these videos that'll show you how to do it. And if nobody taught you how to sew, you can go on YouTube and you can type in how to sew, and you can learn how to sew. You can learn how to crochet. You can learn all these useful skills that I'm talking about. I haven't done it myself, but I'm just saying, if you wanted to do it, you probably could. I couldn't replace a flat tire, but if I wanted to, I could pull it up on my phone and figure it out in like a couple hours. There aren't quite as many guides that talk about growing up as a Christian and being a Christian adult. It's something that a lot of people struggle with. I was reading an old magazine the other day. It was from 2007, and it said that 70% of Christians between the ages of 18 and 22 will leave the church for at least a year. 70% of Christians between 18 and 22 who had gone to church, were raised in the church, will stop going to church for at least a year. That's a lot of people. Fortunately, about 2/3 of them eventually come back in one way or another. And they said, well, they gave different reasons why they came back. 25% said they had a child and they thought the child should be raised in a church. About 20% said that they were married now and they wanted to go to church with their spouse. And then the other people gave different reasons. Apparently, there's something important about being married and going to church with your spouse or having a child and thinking, at least the child should be in church, but it takes some people a while to come to that realization. It takes a while for young people to say, this faith is mine. It's not just my parents' faith, it's my faith. And I'm going to do whatever I have to do because this faith now belongs to me. More or less, that is what we see in Hebrews chapter 11 in these verses. We see a guy named Moses growing up and deciding to do something. But really what he decided doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you just look at that first verse. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. I suppose we should recap how we got to that point. Moses was born, and then Pharaoh's command at the time was all young Hebrew baby boys must be killed. He said, man, there's too many of these Israelites in Egypt. They're filling up the land. They're probably going to take us over, and there's so many of them, they probably could do it. So let's start killing the boys. Moses was born. The command from the Pharaoh was that he be killed. But his parents said, no, we're not going to murder our son. We're going to protect him. But they knew that if they were caught, they could get in trouble. So they hid Moses for as long as they could, and eventually they just had to let him go. Moses' mother took him, put him in a basket in the river, and he just started floating. And then Pharaoh's daughter found him and said, oh, a baby. I've always wanted a baby. I'm going to raise this young baby as my own. And so Moses grew up in the palace. He grew up with Pharaoh. He was in royalty. I mean, he wasn't a natural-born son, but he was still a big deal. That's where he grew up. And then, eventually, he decided to go and check on his own people. He wasn't an Egyptian. He had been raised in the palace, but he was Hebrew. He was an Israelite. He associated with those people who were now in slavery in Egypt. He didn't do it right away. In the book of Acts, we hear that Moses went when he was 40 years old. It took him until he was 40 to go and check on his people, to go and see how his brother and sister were doing. It took him 40 years. Moses, this great man, this man who's referred to as a fine example for all of us, it took him until he was 40 to grow up. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised when it takes young Christians until they're in their mid-20s or 30s. Not that it's an excuse. Moses should have done that before he was 40 years old. But then he makes a decision. We know that he made the decision by seeing his people be mistreated, and there was an Egyptian beating him, and so Moses killed the man. And different commentators disagree on whether or not that was justified. In Stephen's speech in Acts 7, he says Moses did it for a good reason, and some Bible commentators have said, have just out and out called Moses a murderer. That's not for me to decide. But at that point, Moses was saying, I associate with this Hebrew who is being beaten more than the Egyptian who is beating him. Moses could have stayed in the palace. He probably would have been, he wouldn't have been Pharaoh. Probably not, unless something really bad happened. You know, if you look up the royal family in England, there's like 50 people who are all in line, and he was like the Duke of Pigburg or some little town out in the middle of nowhere. That's what Moses was. But, you know, that's still a chance. You don't know what could happen. People got sick of all sorts of weird things. They didn't have hospitals back then. But Moses rejected all of that. And he chose to be mistreated. And at that moment, Moses had a realization. This is not something new to me, but I realize that God's people are always mistreated. And so I'm going to be mistreated too. God's people are always mistreated. That didn't just start in the 60s when the TV came out. Christians were mistreated before that. Christians are mistreated all over the world, in Africa, in Asia, and yes, here in America too. Christians are persecuted for their beliefs. They're made fun of. They're backward. We're old. We're old-fashioned. We don't understand the way that the world is anymore. But Moses was looking ahead to his reward. He didn't know exactly who Jesus was going to be, although Moses did talk about a prophet like me who is going to come. Moses said, I am here, but somebody better is coming. Moses knew that even though God's people were mistreated, would continue to be mistreated, eventually something good was coming at the end. And that something good is something that you know. It's when God sent his son to be mistreated even further. Jesus came to earth and he was mistreated by his own people, by his own disciples, by his own family, and then he suffered and then he died. But when he died for the sins of you and me. And then he rose from the dead. And God has promised that each of us will also rise. Moses was looking forward all the way to that. Moses knew that in his life he was going to have a lot of suffering. And he suffered in a lot of the same ways that Jesus did. Moses was mistreated by his own people, mistreated by his own family. He was filled with self-doubt, but he persisted because he was looking forward to his reward. We have to make a decision. I think we have to make the same choice that Moses made. And I'm still working on this thought because I'm a young guy, still trying to figure this stuff out. Not figure out the being a pastor part. Of course, I'm perfect in that way, and I know exactly what I'm doing all the time. So, no, I'm not trying to figure out being a pastor. I know everything already. I'm going to teach these older guys something in a little bit. But the being a Christian part, still trying to figure that out in some ways. What it means to be an adult Christian, what it means to be a mature Christian, because Moses, when he was grown up, he chose to be mistreated. So it seems to me that at some point, mature Christians will choose to be mistreated. They know Jesus died for them, they know their sins are forgiven, and then they choose to be associated with other Christians. That's hard for a lot of reasons. When I look out in the media for Christians who speak up and say things, I don't find a lot of good examples. I don't feel drawn to somebody like Joel Osteen. I don't feel drawn to a lot of televangelists. I don't feel drawn to some people who stand up with signs and shout in people's faces. Not that those people aren't trying to do their best. But what does it mean to be an adult Christian, to be a grown-up Christian, to be a mature Christian? Which of these people's examples am I supposed to follow? Well, you could follow Moses. If you can't think of anybody else, if you don't have any other good examples in your life, you can see what Moses did and try to emulate that. Moses chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He left the palace. He went out. He could have lived there his entire life. He could have stayed there and bowed down to different gods. He could have worshiped Pharaoh, worshiped the sun god, worshiped all sorts of different gods for different things that were happening. He could have been wealthy. He wouldn't have been a slave. Moses was a free man. But he realized that by turning his back on his people, turning his back on his God and worshiping other gods, he would be doing something that's wrong. And Moses realized that God had something important for him to do. I mean, God told Moses, you're going to set my people free. And at that point, Moses could have turned back. He could have said, no, thank you. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back to Egypt, and I'm going to smooth talk my way back into the palace. I'm going to lay down in a chair and have people put grapes in my mouth and fan me with big feather fans. I'm going to do that. That's what I want. Moses chose to be mistreated. And even now, Christians have to choose to be mistreated. I think those young people who are leaving the church, and this isn't based on statistics, they say different things. I've been going to church long enough, it was time for something different. My friends weren't going to church. I moved, whatever. I think part of it is that they're becoming mature. They're growing up, and they realize it's not easy to be a Christian. A lot of people will discourage you from doing it. And so they say, forget it. I'm not doing that. I want to have friends. I want to have fun. I want to be popular. I want to have an easy life. I don't want to be the guy who sits in a church and tries to invite my friends, and they say, why do you go to that church? That church is weird. The service is weird. You sit down in an old building, you sing old songs. I don't like that. Some of those young Christians still choose to sit there, to be a part of a church, to grow up, and to suffer, to be mistreated. I don't have everything all figured out, not by a long shot. But it seems to me that this is what God wants each of us to do. That these words from Hebrews 11 aren't written here just so we could look at this and say, Moses, another good guy. A lot of good guys in the Bible. But that we would look at what he did. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. The woman who raised him, who took care of him, who fed him, he said, I am not your son. It doesn't seem very nice. It doesn't seem very grateful. It's not that he wasn't thankful for everything that she did, but he's saying, I'm not an Egyptian. I'm not one of you. I'm one of God's people. And if God's people are mistreated, then I'll be right there with them. Moses was looking ahead to the prophet, like him, who was going to come. Somebody who was going to suffer. And Moses said, if Christ is going to suffer, I'm going to suffer too. If God's people will suffer, I will be there. So I'm going to challenge you to decide to do that. It's not easy to be a Christian. You know that by now. But whatever comes, understand it's coming. Understand you're going to be mistreated. It's not a prediction about the United States falling apart, becoming anti-God, anything like that. You just see that from the Bible. Moses was mistreated. Jesus was mistreated. Every other person in these pages was. And you will be too. So accept it. Understand that. And don't run away, but look forward. Look past this life to the life to come. Look forward to your reward, the reward that is promised to everyone who lives by faith, the reward that came to Jesus at the end of his life. He ascended up into heaven, is seated at the right hand of God the Father. I'm looking forward to going to heaven, and you can be too. That is your reward that is promised to everyone who chooses to be mistreated, to everyone who endures, to everyone who trusts in Jesus as their Savior, and not in their own actions. It's not an easy choice to make, but it is a mature one. I hope you make it. Amen.